Joining us this afternoon is now Dr. Robert Royal, who is the president of the Faith and Reason Institute. He's also the editor-in-chief of The Catholic Thing, an online publication. He's the author of probably over 20 books. One of his great books, in my judgment, is The Catholic Martyrs of the 20th Century, The God That Did Not Fail, and a book called Reinventing the American People, the Unity and Diversity Today. He's written for scores of periodicals, including the National Review, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, and the American Spectator. Tonight, I thought we'd talk about freedom of religion versus freedom from religion. And Dr. Royal, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, George.
Let me ask you this in a general question before we get to specifics, specifically about Obamacare and the challenges against religious freedom. When you look at the mess this nation is in at this point in time, and historically we've had waves of anti-Catholicism and nativism in this nation, and that was generally localized type of situations that dissipated over time. But today we're finding different sort of challenges. What do you think the root of the assaults, particularly the national government, on religion today? What's the basis of it? What's the root of it in your judgment?
Well, as you know, it's a complex question, but probably the central issue is that there's been a kind of an emergence of a secular ideology that hasn't really been part of the United States in the past. Unlike in Europe, our democracy sort of flows out of our religious views. Historians use this as one of the distinguishing marks of America as opposed to Europe. But we've gotten, lately, we've gotten to interpreting our own founding documents as if they were sort of French Revolution, European-style documents where liberty has to be liberty from our religious beliefs. Well, once you do that, of course, you lose the sense of the sacredness of the human person and conscience and other things. You end up with materialism. And I think that ideology, in various direct and indirect ways, has started to take a role in developing legislation and policies at the local, state, and federal level, and it inevitably becomes an alternative to the older religious views, and in fact, it has wanted to squeeze them out of the public square. So it's a very potent movement, and it's at all levels in the society right now.
Well, Professor Hadley Arkes has postulated that while Abraham Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address said 77 years ago, referring to 1776, the beginning of the nation, and the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, which refers to the natural law in there, while President Obama refers to the beginning of the nation as 1789 when the Constitution kicked in, which directly does not refer to the natural law, but most people like Lincoln would presuppose the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution was built on that. Do you think Mr. Obama, who claims to be a constitutional lawyer, that is a on-purpose distinction in order to disregard the concept of the natural law?
Well, I think that's the first step, that we hold these truths to be self-evident and that men have been endowed by their creator with certain rights. I mean, that's the American creed right there, as I was saying earlier. This is very different from the European way of approaching these things. But I would say that President Obama isn't all that much a fan of the Constitution either, because look, whatever you think about the HHS mandates about contraception and sterilization and morning after pills, to impose those regulations on not only Catholic institutions, as people sometimes think, but on all religious institutions, Muslim, Orthodox, Jewish, et cetera, who have moral objections, this is a very high-handed way of approaching things. And if you recall, when he announced this, what he said is, we're not going to go back on this because this women's health is a fundamental right. Well, this is where I think that secularist ideology that I was just talking about really comes to the fore in great strength. Because as we know, what's in the First Amendment to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights that was put there to protect certain liberties, because people were afraid that in spite of the Constitution that they would be denied. Well, the First Amendment not only has freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, but freedom of religion. And somehow, suddenly, in 2013, women's fundamental health, whatever that means, has now become more first than the First Amendment in the Constitution. So I don't think that this is a matter of trying to split a difference between the natural law that we find in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I think it's a wholesale rejection of a established rule of law in this country that is really metamorphosing into something else.
Well, Dr. Royal, there are cynics who suggest that not only is Obamacare an assault on our religious freedom, but it's also a movement hoping to push the Catholic Church, and for that matter all religious institutions, out of the healthcare business. The belief being that only the nanny state, only Big Brother should be running that, and they resent the fact that all these billions of dollars, be it federal or state dollars, are going into Catholic or Protestant hospitals. Do you think there's a broader picture here besides the suits that are going on right now?
Well, yeah, this is where that ideology begins to try to reach into the institutions, because if you're going to say that you've got a more First Amendment than the First Amendment of the Constitution, in other words, you've got a sense of a right and wrong that circumvents our existing legal arrangement. What you're going to do is you're going to start to impose that on specific institutions. And it's not only Catholic hospitals, as you rightly say, there are Protestant hospitals, Jewish hospitals, on and on and on. But you can make it look as if this is just a particular sectarian point of view that you're pushing back against, when in fact, this is an attempt to impose, even on private institutions, things that don't have to be done this way, by the way. I mean, you could achieve the same goal of getting this sort of coverage by many other means. And the fact that these institutions are sort of being dragged in and told, you will do this in the way that we're going to tell you that you're going to do it, something that was almost unthinkable just even 10 or 15 years ago in the United States. This shows a drive toward imposing a certain view on people in the public square. And, will religious liberty exist in the sense that you can go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or, a prayer service? That probably will continue, but that was the case, at least theoretically, even in the old Soviet Union. You had the right to go to a church in the old Soviet Union, but it didn't have any real purchase on the rest of the society. It was sort of it was fenced off, and it became sort of just a private hobby for most people.
We have about a minute left in this segment, Dr. Royal. One last question. Same-sex marriage. If the Supreme Court or the courts declare same-sex marriage a civil right, what impact do you think it will have on churches where marriages are performed, where churches represent the state as well as the religion that they represent both? What kind of impact do you think it's going to have?
Well, I think that's going to be actually the most damaging to that issue will be the most damaging for religious liberty of all. I think that if the AHHS mandates were ever to make their way up to the Supreme Court, we might actually see the High Court protect religious liberty, because the Supreme Court, even the more liberal members, the conservative members, they all tend to walk away and keep at a distance from interfering with the free exercise that religious institutions and individuals are allowed to have. On this particular issue, again, it's similar to this women's health. If opposition to homosexuality is to be equated with a civil rights infraction or even a hate crime to speak out against it, those religious bodies or even secular voices who think that there is a moral case to be made that's quite different than that are going to be looked upon as the Ku Klux Klan, as racists, as enemies of the human race, as violators of civil rights. And if that's the case, and churches are regarded as institutions that by their very nature are preaching hatred that you can't tolerate in a free society, I think that's going to be the most damaging thing of all for religious liberty.
Dr. Royal, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it very much.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you. I'm George.